Julia may join us as we go, but let me welcome everybody to our roundtable discussion. As you will see on the screen, all the speakers here are Carnegie African Diaspora Fellows. This session, let me say, unofficially is being sponsored, organized by the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program. And our main theme here is looking at African studies and Agenda 2063 in the age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, what we're going to do here is have a discussion of this issue from diverse perspectives. So you're going to see some perspectives coming from the social sciences, African studies, science and technology, art and humanities, and we are addressing a key question for this particular session. How can African studies facilitate the engagement of Africans in the diaspora and on the continent in a shared vision to achieve key transformational outcomes of Agenda 2063 in the age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and, of course, COVID-19 pandemic? My name is Henry Bulley, and I have this dubious distinction of telling people I'm not a bully. I'm from the Borough Manhattan Community College in the City University of New York. Our panelists today are going to be Professor Okome, Political Science, African Women's Studies at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. She's my senior here. Dr. Samuel Zelega at the College of Arts and Sciences, Gerontology at Bethel University, St. Paul, Minnesota. Professor Florence Wakoko-Studstil, Department of Criminal Justice and Sociology, Columbus State University in Georgia. In Georgia. Then we have Dr. Julia Ugorji. She's not here yet. Nursing and Allied Health, North Hennepin Community College, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Dr. Esther Obonyo, the director, should I say rightly, the founding director of the Global Building Network, the College of Engineering, Design and Architectural Engineering, the Penn, the one and only Pennsylvania State University, University Park, Pennsylvania. And of course, I will round up the discussion as a panelist. So without much ado, I'm going to pause here and ask our first speaker, Professor Okome, to start.
Good afternoon. In engaging Agenda 2063, I think the most logical thing to do is to think about the largest proportion of our population in the continent of Africa, which is the youth. And if we have been paying attention, we've had significant youth restiveness in the continent. There was what people dubbed the Arab Spring, I like to call it the North African Spring, where youth agitated for increased democratization. And they made a huge impact on the world's imagination. A lot of what they started is unfinished project, but they're to be commended. So when I think about what we need to do, I think we need to think about our large and growing youth population, because if we're to succeed in the implementation of the various agenda that the African Union has set for itself, 2030, 2063, we need to engage sustainable development with the youth at the core. And we also need to think about what meaningful youth participation in our politics, in our social relations, in our economic systems, what it means. In order to get to that, we need to consult with them, have conversations with them, listen to them, and respect them. That's not what I see happening in the continent. And, as people who also received this wonderful fellowship. We were supposed to go to African universities and help with curricular development, mentor, and share some of the knowledge that we have, and also interact with our colleagues in order to envision how we will build up the capacities of our tertiary institutions in the continent. So where are the youth congregated? A lot of them are congregated in our universities. So but when I'm Nigerian and I'm looking at the NSAS protests, so talking about youth restiveness, this is indicative. The NSAS protests are indicative of their restiveness and their disillusionment and their reaction to perceived government nonchalance and non-sensitivity toward the plight of the youth. The reason I'm saying this is that there's significant unemployment and underemployment among the youth in our continent. So if we want to have peace in the continent, if we want to have human security, if we want to have sustainable development, we need to have creative policies and strategies that help to transform the challenges and threats that we face in the continent, especially those faced by the African youth. I talked about employment. Having decent work is different than having work. Decent work would give you all the social security benefits that people have, enable for you to have also the ability to take care of your health, to take care of your, basic needs, as well as to be able to look forward to retirement. Many of the jobs that we have in the continent, most of them are in the informal economy, and they don't have these characteristics to them. We also need to reduce the influence of cronyism and how it shuts out people who are not well connected from accessing economic opportunities, even educational opportunities in our continent. We need to ensure that we're not having a situation where we have high levels of economic growth accompanying high levels of inequality, which is a feature of a lot of the economic systems that we have in this our global era. So in order for our continent to be at peace, in order for the continent to grow, in order for the continent to reach its full potential, we have to take the youth seriously as the most important constituency that we should reach, in order to harness their potential to contribute to national development as well as their own self-development. I think we're missing a key opportunity because many of our youth want to be in the diaspora. Why? They don't have opportunities, whether it's educational or employment or chances of decent upward mobility in the continent. And many of them actually go through terrible migrations where lives are lost, where there's a lot of trauma, where there's a lot of exploitation. But many of these things that we are seeing, the unemployment, migration as an outlet to go be able to meet one's needs, they are not inevitable. Another thing that one finds is that there are these insurgencies in the continent. And when you look at who are the members of the insurgencies, it's youth. If you think about criminality, you find also that you have a lot of youth who are involved. And, you know, I don't want this to be misinterpreted for people to say, okay, the youth are this malevolent force, because that's usually what is said. You know, they're this youth bulge, they're going to explode and whatever. The explosion is not inevitable, okay? And what we need to do is to be proactive. And in the proactivity, actually, we also need to prioritize gender, because a lot of the, you know, whatever is being felt by the youth is felt more by women, and is felt a lot more by people who are differently abled. So the disabled also are highly marginalized in our continent. So we need to be proactive. We need to think about, okay, how are we going to create decent employment opportunities? Instead of asking everybody to go and be an entrepreneur, which is really exciting, you know, but it's not everybody that is cut out to be an entrepreneur. And before you can be entrepreneurial, there's a need for infrastructure. There's a need for the government to also have enabling environment, not just for external investors coming into our continent, but for the people who are there, and especially for our youth. You know, something we also have in the continent is that the youth who are in the rural areas are actually even in worse situations. And that's why we have the huge influx of people from the rural areas to the urban areas, because there are very few economic opportunities in the rural areas. So what we're going to do has to be with a view to make sure that we really develop our rural areas, create excellent education, excellent health care, excellent jobs in our rural areas. So it's not rocket science. If you do that, what are people going to go to the cities to do? You know, they go to the cities because there are no opportunities, and life in many of the rural areas is not as congenial as life even in the crowded metropolises that we have. So what kind of strategies do we need? Well, I think this is the function of the state. And I dare say that the African state has missed its way. It's lost, because when the nationalist struggle was going on in the era of colonization, the promise was that if we get independence, life was going to be more abundant for all of us, you know. So there was a social contract that said that the state was going to be significantly responsible for the welfare of citizens. Now, in this neoliberal era, we have the minimalist kind of state that is not interested. It's either unwilling or it's unable to do anything in terms of its basic responsibilities that fulfills the social expectations of our people. So I think, I want to say again, it's the duty of the state to prioritize the well-being of citizens. And since our youth, I keep saying, are the largest proportion of our population, we really have to think of how to make accommodations that enable for them not only to survive, but to thrive and to excel. So we have development plans in our continent. Do we implement our development plans in any kind of worthwhile way? If we want to think about what we should put in, I think initiatives and policies that give priority to gender equitable youth employment and capacity development. If you're thinking about capacity development, of course, education and skills building are part of this. You know, I also think we need apprenticeships, we need mentoring programs, we need to formalize them, we need to also fund them and give all the support that is necessary for these kinds of programs to thrive, so that people learn even before they graduate in terms of the fields that they're going to go into. And they have people who would mentor them and show them the ropes and so forth. We also need adequate budgetary allocations, and efficient implementation. Because I see a lot of beautiful plans in our continent, and my country, Nigeria, is very, very skilled at producing plans and strategies and whatever. When it comes to implementation, everybody drops the ball. So implementation. And also, there's a role for private sector businesses to play, because they are the ones, besides the government, that employ, people. So they should be contributing actually to many of our higher educational institutions. They should give scholarships, they should endow chairs, they should sponsor research, and so on and so forth. A lot of this would make opportunities available for youth in the institutions. And then they should also think about how they're going to open up their recruitment systems so that they reduce the influence of crony systems. So there should also be a long-term commitment to partnerships that bring governments, NGOs that are interested in youth issues, and our educational institutions together. Well, they're also the so-called development partners, but I think a lot of times they're part of the problem, because the quandary that we are in now in terms of having these neoliberal systems was because of advice and actually enforcement of neoliberalism and its imposition on the African continent from institutions like the World Bank and the IMF and, the Washington Consensus, the US, the UK, and so forth. So there's a historicity to the situation that we're in. It didn't just emerge out of thin air. And a lot of the bad advice that we got, we should make sure that we learn from the lessons of history and have an Africa agenda that is autonomous and different from the agenda of the institutions and the development partners that say they want to help us. People can only help you if you yourself know what you want. And many times I think Africa goes to the negotiations without a clear agenda. And in terms of what the clarity of the agenda should be, put the youth front and center, their interests and their hopes and aspirations in terms of what they want to see in the continent. We also need to do some kind of planning that synchronizes education with the job market realities, because I don't think this is done in any kind of significant way. So people just go and they get degrees and there's no place for them to go. And this doesn't mean I'm saying that we should do all that technical education stuff exclusively that people are always peddling. But, let's give some thought to what are the fields where we need people, train, try to advise our young people to go into those fields to the extent possible, and then give them the facilities that they need to succeed in terms of the mentoring that I've mentioned, apprenticeships, learning while they're studying, and so on and so forth. We also need to collect better data. So we need gender disaggregated data across the board in the continent, because a lot of times the data we have just presents the reality as though it is one homogeneous set of people without any differentiation and without any thinking about how to make sure that the data that we have also feeds into the policy making and, in a way that enables for us to modify our policies as we move along. So in terms of what I am saying, what did I do as a Carnegie Fellow? I did, mentoring. I helped to redesign curricula. I also did try to facilitate an exchange program between my university and University of Ibadan, where I was a fellow. Unfortunately, I think making sure that these kinds of policies work well, I mean, the exchange programs work well, it takes more than just will, you know. It takes a lot of tenacity and a lot of ambassadorial work and a lot of follow-up. Because oftentimes when administrations change, the priorities shift in our educational institutions. So what I'm advising is that we should prioritize youth. That if we prioritize youth, we're going to be adding significant value to the largest proportion of the population in the continent. And if we do this in a mindful way, we're going to solve a lot of the problems that are being envisaged as challenges in the future that would prevent the success of the accomplishment of Agenda 2063. So Africa needs to take its youth seriously. Governments need to be less punitive and less extrajudicial in their action towards the youth. And the provision of jobs, the provision of mentorship opportunities, of apprenticeships, upscaling our educational institutions so that they're centers of excellence would not only help the youth, it's actually going to be what transforms our continent so that we'll exceed the agenda that we have set for ourselves in terms of sustainable development towards 2063. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Okome. That's a good lead way into this particular session. Each presenter going forward will have about 10 to 12 minutes. The next speaker is Dr. Samuel Zelega. You can go ahead now.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present. I did my CUNY African Diaspora Fellowship in Nigeria and in 2 universities, one Federal University, Gashua in the northeastern part of the country, and then at University of Jos. The emphasis of my fellowship was, of course, teaching, but mainly development studies and social change. My earlier emphasis when I did my master's degree in Nigeria was in rural sociology because I grew up in a rural community and my interest has always been and still remains with those people who are really at the bottom of the pyramid in Nigeria or in any part of the world. But in Africa in particular, I'm particularly interested in those people who Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. So the title of my presentation is going to be The Challenge of Promoting Inclusive Development and Social Change in Africa in the Area of Neoliberal Globalization. So what I try to do is to look at page 6 to 7 of Africa's Agenda 2063 to see some of the objectives. And then on that basis, then I decided to make some comment and contribution in relation to what is the theme of my presentation. Well, the first thing I want to say is that my impression after I did a kind of textual analysis of the document is just that it seems to me like the people who wrote this document are some people very high up in the system, and they were not communicating with the people of Africa, but they were communicating with some people outside, because the tone of the document doesn't seem to me like I grew up in a rural community and I consider myself to be a campesino, to use the term they use in Latin America. So the tone of the document doesn't seem to indicate that the people who wrote the document are really aware of those people who are really at the bottom of the pyramid in Africa. So that's one of the things that is my concern about the document, that any agenda that is going to transform Africa should be written in such a way that anybody who reads the document would feel that the person who wrote the document is aware of those people who are really at the bottom. And in relation to that, one of the things that I've always been very interested in is just the way the modern world came into existence. And I developed this interest since when I was an undergraduate. There was one professor that introduced me to all this process of change in Europe, and I've been very interested in that. Now, some Afrocentric scholars will think this is kind of, you're just being Eurocentric by trying to study Europe or whatever. I don't really buy that kind of argument, and especially for somebody like myself who has left Africa to come and stay here in the Western world. If I am truly about Afrocentrism, maybe I should have stayed in somewhere in the northeastern part of Nigeria and stay there. But since I am here, I think my desire is to understand, how did the modern world come into existence? And when you really do that, you really find out that Africa has a very long way to go. Some of the people in many parts of Nigeria that I know are not even having conversations that some parts of Europe had in the 19th century. Talk less of, say, in the middle of the 20th century, okay? So, but as Hamza Alavi said, it is almost like we're in a situation where we have this overdeveloped post-colonial state where the whole thing was imposed from outside, but we have not taken time seriously to understand what it really takes to create this modern society. I do not necessarily mean that we have to replicate exactly what the Western world did, but the important thing, as Japanese did, for instance, they use reverse engineering to just understand how Europe did certain things in terms of manufacturing certain things so that they can learn from that. And so one of the things that I recommend in this respect is a term that Manthia Diawara coined, reverse anthropology. Reverse anthropology means, just like in the early history of anthropology, Europeans went and understood our culture and all those kind of things. So at this point, we need to understand, how did Europe come into the modern world? I think there's something, in the summer, I spent some time just trying to understand that. And the reason why I'm just doing that is to understand, what will it take? What are the basic and minimum requirements for creating a modern society? How you create it is a different thing, but what are the minimum requirements? The second point I would like to comment on is the vision of inclusive growth and sustainable development. Again, as I said much earlier, when I read that document, the Agenda 2063, I feel like maybe the people who wrote it were just communicating with somebody somewhere. And the reason why I say this is simply because if you understand neoliberal globalization, under neoliberal globalization, the allocation of resources is contingent on demand and supply. You see, neoliberalism, if you really understand it really very well, even religion doesn't have much role to play in that respect. As I always tell my students who are Christians, I tell them that actually the role of demand and supply under neoliberalism replaces the role of the Holy Spirit in the life of a Christian. Because you have inadequate information in a market economy that is neoliberal. If you want to make informed decision, you have to rely on the market. The market transmits information, a lot of wisdom. So in this respect, when the market is allocating resources on that basis, the market in and of itself is not necessarily concerned, as Professor Okome said, about maybe justice, about fairness or whatever. No, it has its own logic. So my point here is just that it seems to me like a little bit simplistic for our leaders to talk about the vision of inclusive and sustainable development when the logic that is going to inform the system is neoliberal globalization. I studied China a little bit, and I found out that when China was under socialism, for instance, they had this comprehensive agenda for developing the whole country. But once they adopted this neoliberal policies or whatever, you find out that the parts of China that are developing are more parts that the market indicates there's some money to be made there. If there's no money to be made in that particular part of China, that part of China is actually ignored. So I think neoliberalism is characterized by uneven development. So if this is what African countries are talking about, they want inclusive growth and sustainable development, and then embracing neoliberalism, they have to be prepared with uneven development and the fact that the allocation of resources is not going to be informed by social commitment to social justice, fairness, or equity. It's just where the market really takes you. Third, Pan-Africanism can only exist in the form of neoliberal Pan-Africanism. I was at the University of Ibadan when a conference was held and somebody raised this question of Pan-Africanism. I said, look, I'm not against Pan-Africanism, but you assume that this is going to take place under the regime of neoliberal globalization. Under the regime of neoliberal globalization, it's this dog eat dog. Did you not notice how even the European countries and even the United States is trying to duke it out with China or whatever, you know? So there's all this competition among even the powerful nations. It's like, a competition. And when there's this competition, there are always going to be winners and losers. So there's all this competition among even the powerful nations. It's like a competition. And when there's this competition, there are always going to be winners and losers. So there's all this competition. And when there's this competition, there are always going to be winners and losers. This is the logic of the system. So this Pan-Africanism sounds to me like very simplistic. It's not that I'm against it, but what I'm just saying is that under the logic of neoliberal globalization, nations are supposed to compete, and when they compete, there are going to be winners and losers. So some African countries are going to lose, some others are going to really win. So unless if they are talking about a Pan-Africanism that is different, but otherwise it will become just neoliberal Pan-Africanism. Then the fourth point I want to make is the vision to make
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Oh my God. Okay. So let me make just one point about problematizing African cultural identity. They also talk about problematizing cultural, using African cultural identity. Again, under neoliberal globalization, culture becomes a commodity. It is almost like a brand. Okay. So I'm just really wondering, and David Layton wrote a book about languages in Africa, and he said language has market value. And language is an integral part of culture. And if language is an integral part of culture, just look around the world. The languages that are being learned now are languages that have market value. Mandarin, for instance. So if your language has market value, it's going to really be taken seriously. So again, I just want the African leaders to understand that if you're talking about culture, I'm not against it, but under the regime of neoliberal globalization, culture is going to become a commodity. And then with regard to democratization, this should be known to everybody that if you're pursuing democracy, you want good governance and all these things, and then at the same time, you're pursuing neoliberal globalization, whatever, as Jürgen Habermas has argued, there's a way in which the economy expands and colonizes the private sphere. It also colonizes the public sphere, for instance, democracy. Even in this country, you see very clearly that the economy is colonizing American democracy and diminishing the meaning of what democracy really is. So I think African leaders have to be very careful in this respect. So there are other things I want to say, but I will just stop here not to take too much time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Florence Wakoko-Studstil. The floor is yours. Hi, Florence, you can unmute yourself.
So please give me that minute that I lost. Thank you, my colleagues. You've raised very pertinent issues. And let me just touch on what Professor Zalanga raised. I like the approach, the critical analysis of this 2063. And yes, it's true, there is stiff competition. These are capitalist economies and that are spreading all over the world. And you are questioning how Africa can actually move forward with this whole approach of unity in the context of competition. It's very tough. I agree. But I will say though that while competition is there, we know the bottom line is money when it comes to capitalist economies. We've got to work hard to put a human face on capitalism, on business, on supply and demand. I think we need a human face. After all, we are the ones who actually sustain capitalism, and we are the ones who provide the engine for it to survive. So my discussion now is going to focus on how we can ensure that the girls receive education and the education they receive is safe. We want them to feel safe and they must have access to quality education. I will say that by providing the context, picking up from where Professor Okome started giving a strong background, I want to mention, in addition to what you stated, that what Africa is going through right now is a serious transformation leading to the fourth industrial revolution that Dr. Zalanga talked about. So this transformation is characterized by the following. There are many, but I mentioned the following. A major, the transformation from smallholder subsistence farming, which is mainly predominated by women. They play a critical role there in food production. A transformation from there to farming, which is commercial agribusiness based. And that is very highly mechanized. And as we know it, it tends to be male dominated. There's another revolution or transformation, and that is the changes of the market economy, business employment. The employment structure has changed tremendously and it continues. So many people are unemployed. And even those who are employed, some of them get what does not commensurate with the energy, effort and time that they put in. So there is also another point I would like to mention here, the transformation which is in education, teaching and learning. The pedagogies are also transforming because of the digital transformations that we are going through right now. And all these right now as we speak, they are embedded within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are creating disruptions, they are creating uneasiness, and we know very well that when that happens, certain groups suffer most. And to this point, I want to look at women and girls. We do know that women and girls have historically been marginalized or ignored or relegated to jobs, opportunities which actually do not provide remuneration the way men have had. So using my fellowship as an example, I got an fellowship, Carnegie Fellowship in 2014, which I completed at Makerere University in Uganda. And then in 2017 at Makerere as well as Sokoine University of Agriculture in Tanzania. But we were two of us. It was a combination, myself and my colleague, Professor Margaret Haidza, who is a veterinarian. So what we did on this project, which actually contributes to the dream for 2063, was to, besides or in addition to teaching and mentoring students, we went ahead and started an organization specifically focused on helping training women in leadership skills, because we got a realization that so many women right now are educated and they hold positions of power in some areas, but at the university levels in the whole of East Africa, women actually were still relegated to the classroom work. Very few were in the boardroom making decisions that pertain to their existence. So this organization trains women, is called Higher Education Resource Services, or HASI, HAS East Africa. I will provide a link here in the, I'll provide a link here. But this organization, you can read more about it. It was started in 2014, and right now we've had several, 3 academies. That is, every year we have academies to train women in leadership and management skills. But that does not stop here, because we do believe that by training women, we are also going to help support the girls. Since our fellowship was at the high level of learning, that's the only entry point we could have, the easiest to get to the girls. And so for the girls, what HAS does is once they are trained, these women become leaders. We want them to be leaders, to be coaches, to be mentors, a concept that Sister Okome mentioned earlier. So there is a lack of mentoring out there in Africa. We have educated so many people. We can't say that Africa has an affinity for educated scholars. They're there. And we also have a significant number of people who are in leadership positions. They're there. But do we go out there intentionally to pull those who are below us and try to coach them, mentor them? Just as a child having access to you and eating with you or talking to you, they get inspired. Many of us did not have those types of role models, but however, we have to go out there intentionally now, knowing that the new normal is very highly competitive, so that we can also help those girls. So what HAS is doing, one thing is to go ahead and develop what calls sanitary clothing, or I could hygienic clothing or sanitary pads, to be straightforward, that are reusable, because of the realization that girls in poor communities, even those in the cities, many of them drop out of school because of that during the monthly problem it becomes a problem because they had to drop out. So because girls were missing schools, making affordable sanitary pads, which are also reusable, is very good. But we've come to a realization that there are questions of health when it comes to reusing a sanitary pad. So has submitted application. In fact, one of the grants that is we are waiting for is a grant to the Bill and Melinda Gates, which is requesting funding for the HAS to go ahead and start a kind of manufacturing sanitary pads using biodegradable materials, African materials, so that the girls can use them. Now, how does that empower girls? How does it make them safe? How does it empower women? The mothers are the ones who have had access to tailoring machines. They are the ones who tailor, who make those sanitary pads. So in the process, they also generate some income for survival. At the same time, they are still helping girls to stay in school. So that's one example. But afterwards, we realized sanitary pads alone is not enough. Poverty looms large. There is a widespread feminization of poverty as we know it in Africa, and particularly for women living in rural places. So what HAS has done is to start give women poultry skills in poultry farming, as well as farming in rabbits. So in Uganda, rural women are farming rabbits and poultry, whereas in Tanzania, we are working with the help of USAID grant and through Sokoine University of Agriculture, we are helping women keep poultry. When we visited that village, one of the villages in Tanzania, it was very painful to see the conditions in which women are living. They are strong, they are ready to do something for survival. Even though they were keeping some chicken, they did not have the knowledge base as to how do you take care of them. Some of them were dying. And some of them were dying not because they didn't have medication, but even water to drink. The area where we went is very dry. So for us here, scholars, as researchers, it is good. I want to challenge ourselves that what we can do, we can use our intellectual capabilities to collaborate with folks back in Africa through universities or through NGOs and work with them and help to find resources and also provide some knowledge base for them to use, because these small projects can help a lot. Well, they can't solve all the problems in Africa, but each one of us can play a role in any small way we can. One of the problems I have found as I collaborate across disciplines with my colleagues, is that we tend to have a tendency at some point to feel that I can only do something if I am going to be there, if I have to be present, or if I own it to say it is mine. That shouldn't be the case. We are the privileged, we are the elites. We can just share our knowledge, intellectual capabilities, share with people. As long as the project goes forward, that's okay. You don't have to be there all the time, nor do you have to get a name for being part of that great project. So that is something I'm learning over time. I don't have to be there, but train other people and let them be the ones to do the work if you are not able to fly over there to be there in person. I will talk a little bit about, if I still have a few minutes, 1 or 2.
About 2-3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. There is this issue of teaching. We tend to talk so much about education matters. Let's teach everybody. But time has come that we have to be very intentional in what do we teach. Let's reimagine education. Let's revamp it. Let's create educational models that actually help people to become even job creators themselves, so that they are not just relying on somebody's job. But within that pedagogy, I want to appeal for pedagogy focusing on social emotional skills. Over time, over the years, we have witnessed girls being abused, a lot of violence in schools, and even outside the schools. I will use an example of what has gone on in Nigeria, Boko Haram. These girls have been brutally abused physically and emotionally. Now, we need to train, include within curriculum, a training focused on social and emotional skills so that the girls are able to navigate the new normal, which has become very problematic, very challenging and unpredictable. So those skills used to be known as soft skills for girls only. But I must say though, that as we train girls, we should not forget boys, because boys also need those skills. And as we train girls, we need to let the boys know that violence is wrong, so that girls are not just on the defending side, but empower the boys also to be able to understand how to move within this world, which has become very challenging. So both emotional and other technical skill sets are critical. And right now, at the time of this pandemic, I have thought about it myself and say, listen, HAS is not going to the villages anymore because of the pandemic. So this is a time now for us to think very innovatively. What do we do? Imagine those girls now out of school, staying home. What is going on with them? So we have to be innovative, and some ideas come into play. That is, if we can, using the CDC specifications, try to apply that science to how we can start training these kids. And that is, give them the skill sets of training them in tailoring, pottery, painting, where you can just spread out, leave out this curriculum, go learn English 1101 or go learn mathematics or something. Those are good. But right now with COVID, they can still be learning some skill sets so that by the time they become mature as women, they will be able to apply themselves. So it is the time right now to start thinking innovatively. And as Professor Zalanga mentioned, yes, let's be very critical of how this 2063 has been designed and bring in that critical analysis to see how we can innovatively strengthen it. But we can't pull away, because as a sociologist, I still strongly believe that we have to put a human face on business or on money. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Florence. Our speaker, Julia, is not here, so we're going to go to Esther. Esther, Dr. Esther Obonyo, you have the floor. Unmute. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, the organizers of the conference, Henry, for leading the setting up of the panel, Carnegie Fellowship Program, and everybody who's attending today. I'm going to just start briefly by explaining how I ended up here. My background is in engineering and architectural design related things. My journey into this space actually started at the University of Florida. I was there for a few years, for several years as an assistant professor. And right from the beginning, the Center for African Studies reached out to me and they had to knock sense in my head because I was trained the very old school way. You're in a silo. This is who you are. This is what you do. Yeah, and that's it. So when they engaged with me, I thought I'll just show up and just be listening, attending seminars and that kind of thing. And they had to pretty much educate me and tell me, you know, if you take your area of specialization and you do work in Africa, that's called African studies. So I was like, I can do this. Yeah, and I'm saying, I'm going somewhere with this. Our education systems, I'm a proud graduate of University of Nairobi, but then at the same time, it pains me to realize that even though it was right under my nose, somebody never told me, or there was nothing in my educational training that made me realize that a house in Nairobi or a house in Kumasi. Yeah, if you're researching housing issues in an African context, that is African studies. Yeah, it's in our blind spot. So there's something wrong with that. I completed a Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship at the University of Nairobi in 2014, and I was very excited about the opportunity because of two things. First of all, it gave me an opportunity to further, work with students from the University of Nairobi to get them to think about their professions, not in the siloed manner, but thinking of themselves as, I'm in this technical discipline, but I have an opportunity to study what is very African about it and use my knowledge of the context to inform these solutions, which very many times are based on the British standard. If you're colonized, if your country was colonized by the British colony, we can change this. But for that to happen at the rate that it needs to happen going forward, we need to bring the knowledge of the context into our building codes. We need to bring the knowledge of the environment based on what has worked for very many years. The local use of materials, how the local use of how they erect the systems and how this is in harmony with the climate. Why is my grandmother's house, which is made out of traditional materials, cooler than my father's house, which is made out of very Western materials? It's because there is language in there, the culture is in there, and we've lost it. I'm not saying Western materials are bad. We can bring them back into the equation, but we should always think of opportunities to inform what is local, to use what is local to inform things which may be more durable, things which work better maybe for resisting extreme weather events that were never there before. During the first Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program, we also started looking at this issue of entrepreneurship. Somebody, a previous speaker, raised it, and I smiled when they say that again. The training in many of our disciplines does not encourage that type of thinking. It doesn't discourage it, but it's never a thing. The only reason why I ended up embracing entrepreneurship was because after many years of thinking, our community, we are geniuses, we're going to bring the house price down and make it more affordable. And then after a while, it was like, it doesn't matter how much down we bring it, it is still going to be expensive. So forget the technology for now. I had to tell myself that we keep working on the technology to improve it, but put it as a secondary thing and focus on the thing that's really hurting our low income and poor communities, lack of money. Yeah, so the solution cannot be just the technology. Kenya recently, I think they still have it. They have this big 5 agenda. One of them is housing. I'm sure that there's always going to be a need for technologies that lower the price of construction, alternative building materials, affordable building materials. We are going to always need that. But until we increase people's purchasing power, the two things are not going to meet. Yeah, so I'm framing my thinking of housing and encouraging people to think of housing not just as a technology, not just as architectural design, but as a service, as a verb, housing. Yeah, it means the person who's inside there needs to be embraced. A lot of the things that they need, we cannot do that from a technical perspective. Yeah, we can use big data. Now, going back to this issue of data science, the 4th industrial revolution, if we get smart about making our solutions human-centered, then we can start to unlock the value of big data. Yeah, like how do we capture the things that can empower the households? How do we translate these to holistic solutions that look at not just the house as a building envelope, but looks at it as a location that makes it easy for them to get to work, a location that makes it easy for the youth. Somebody talked about young people, the location making it easy for the young people to access quality education opportunities. Yeah, when we start having conversations about the location again, how do we use data? How do we start to use data science to inform us about high-risk areas that should be avoided? And if they cannot be avoided, how do we use it again to also talk to engineers about strengthening the foundation? So another example, I went back to Kenya in 2018 as a Carnegie African Diaspora Fellow for the second time. This time round, I was at Mount Kenya University. And then the person that I was working with and we were focusing on mentoring graduate students, and we had a research project on urban health and looking at issues of vector-borne diseases. And so in other words, thinking about mosquitoes and how to mosquito-proof the house. because a lot of these issues happen inside the house. If it's not inside the house, it's because the house doesn't work. It's too hot. I'm going outside and I'm beaten outside. So again, broadening the conversation, and I would like to see the agenda for our African countries for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, to start to encourage students and professionals to think of what they are doing, not as a technology, people in my profession, but as a verb, a solution. You're offering housing. Malaria is still a top killer. Every 2 minutes, a child dies. So how many minutes did we have today? That's the number of children who've died. Yeah, and when we think of housing as a service, it's supposed to protect these children. If they're being beaten in their houses, the houses are not protecting them from malaria, and it's killing them. And I wanted also to reflect a little bit on the words that we're using: power, persistence, purpose, possibility. The first one, power, cash is king. Yeah, a fundamental need that is not being addressed sufficiently. It's come up. How to increase the purchasing power of people, how to teach them how to make money in a capitalistic system. That is where we are. It's not going to change. Yeah. Data. If we are getting into the fourth industrial revolution, we have a problem of information overload. My PhD thesis, information overload, featured a lot. That's 15, maybe 15 years ago. So now it's even quadrupled. Yeah. Why are we not encouraging the young people to think of themselves as data analysts, people who can help make sense of the data? They know the context more than my students. Why is it that when my student spends 1 month in Tanzania, they put together an article, and if you Google like bricks in Tanzania, my student's name comes up. He's only been there for 1 month. Yeah, he understands the value of data. Our African students have not been sensitized to realize that this is power, yeah, ability to process information very quickly and make sense out of it. And they can make money out of this. Data ownership. A lot of the times we have people coming into our countries collecting information from us. They collect information about our land, our soil, and all that kind of thing. We lose ownership, and then we have to pay them to get access to the information, to data that they have about our soil. Let's take ownership of our data. Let's take ownership of issues related to privacy. We are putting a lot of information on social media for free, and there are people who are mining that data and making money out of it. Yeah. I want to talk about persistence as well. The culture that I was born and brought up in, you had to be perfect. You have to have an A. An A minus is not good. You cannot be number 2. You have to be number 1. Yeah. The students I'm teaching today, I'm very pleasantly surprised when they tell me that for their career fair, they showed up with a resume of failures. They showed up with a resume of the things which they did not, and they get hired immediately. Why is our society giving our students and setting up unrealistic goals? We're not asking people to make stupid decisions, but there is a place for noble failure. There is a place where we can celebrate and reward the honest hard work and the diligence with which our students are pursuing certain objectives. Even if the outcome is not right, surely there has to be a place where we are rewarding them for the persistence, the entrepreneurism, possibilities. I will end with this. Right now, because of COVID, we've learned that network of living labs can actually work. This is good for us. In one of the projects that we recently got awarded by the Belmont Forum, it's a collaborative research action for disaster risk reduction. We are hoping that we'll be able to model this network of living labs, looking at disaster risky areas in Florida, Brazil, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and a little bit of UK. And we want the people who are on the ground to be driving the agenda. We have stakeholders, a few stakeholders, and we're looking for more stakeholders because of what I pointed out earlier. If it's going to function as a network of living labs, then the people on the ground need to be driving the agenda. I am a researcher and an educator. I am not the person who understands their context. We are bringing in data science in the hope that by accumulating data from all the different stakeholders, all the different disciplines that are participating, we can start to prototype a concept for low-income housing not just one concept, but several concepts that showcase how disaster risk reduction can be done in different contexts. And I'm going to stop at that. I'm going to stop with an invitation that the way the Belmont Forum works, our network is supposed to grow. So I'm also putting the call out there. If you want to experiment with us with this network of living labs approach, please reach out. We will welcome you. If you have young people in African countries who want to be part of this, we will give them mentoring and advice and advising. We will, where possible, if we are hiring, if we are admitting research students, we will definitely work with them to try to help them get through the admission process. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Florence. Esther, let me see there. The engineer among us is succinct and brief to it, so it always shows. It's my turn to contribute. I would like to talk from the perspective of my background. And what I want to emphasize here is harnessing Earth observation and geospatial technologies to improve livelihoods of Africans. I want to talk about this by actually looking at it within the context of what we're talking about. I'm trying to make my comment and then sort of round up the discussion that we have so far so we can go into discussion. When Samuel was talking, he mentioned something about the people who wrote this document, Agenda 2063, who were they talking to? Actually, it was a continent's manifesto to the world. I think they first presented it at the World Economic Forum, right? And it was certainly to indicate to the world that this is what we want Africa to be. So it was not surprising to hear that they were not really thinking about what about the people out there, but sometimes if you lift from the bottom up, you lift everybody up. So this is one of the key things I want to highlight here. But then we look at Agenda 2063, and within the context of this particular session, how does it intersect with information technology? It's listed there, right? But then if you look at information technology, science, technology, innovation, STI, as indicated in Agenda 2063, it sort of ties in with this whole idea of the hour of decision. And Esther mentioned that clearly. If you're looking at power, persistence, purpose, possibility in African studies, yes, anything that you do that links to Africa is African studies. And just like me, it took me a while to realize that if I'm doing any work that helps anything in Ghana, my homeland, or Uganda, where I would say my adopted homeland now because I do most work there, you're still working about Africa, and that's why it gets into that. The question then had been for some of us in the science and technology areas, we need to understand that wholesale adoption of these ICTs, the fourth industrial revolution, without understanding the cultural heritage that have actually brought African communities to the 20th and the 21st century, is sort of counterproductive. And you could hear some of our speakers talking about that over here. Now, one of the key questions we have here is, how can African studies facilitate the engagement of Africans in the diaspora and on the continent in a shared vision to achieve key transformational outcomes of Agenda 2063? I'm doing this looking at the key projects of Agenda 2063. The flagship projects are about 15 of them. I'm not going to say all of them. You have integrated high-speed network. You have science and silencing guns by 2020. And we still had guns in Nigeria in 2020. So where are we going? But what I really want to hone on here is looking at the Africa outer space strategy. Now, within the outer space strategy, they talk about space technology. They talk about space data, utilizing space information. And I was asking, so why wouldn't they just say Earth observation data, because that is what the field is using. But going with that, I want to take a step back and look at what I have done, my experience, especially as a Carnegie African Diaspora fellow. First, I went to Uganda in 2016, and over there I did a workshop on landscape ecology and geospatial technology for sustainable development. But the key thing is, over there then, there was a conference on the African Remote Sensing Association, and I made a presentation there. I had collaborations there, and when we were having discussion, I think the last day, we had sort of interacted, socialized, and we were asking, how do we continue this interaction? And out of that discussion came in, we need to be able to forward what we've learned, what our collaborations are. So from the 11th International Conference of African Association of Remote Sensing and Environment, we thought there's going to be this international conference, that's a GEO, that's Geospatial group of Earth observation, and they have these plenaries every other year. So for once, we decided, why don't we Africans organize a session about Africa? Instead of we go to these meetings, attend sessions that are organized for Africans. So myself and the Africa GEOS, that Africa session of the GEOS project, we organized this session called Africa GEOS, Strengthening Partnerships with African Diaspora on Earth Observation. This lady was in Switzerland, but she moved to South Africa afterwards. And what happened here was, this was something being organized, myself here and an African on the continent, and we're organizing it for Africa. But the moment we started, the big names in Earth observation, who are mostly outside Africa, came in. We have these projects about Africa. We have the soil moisture data for Africa. The US have a major data set for Africa. We want to share to people, and we said, but we also have aspirations. We also have plans under the Africa GEOS that we want to share with the world. And it was a tricky thing because sometimes some of us are dealing with people that are the first names in the field when you start looking at research and training. Sometimes you're talking about somebody who may have taught you before, you have to say no. We persisted, and it was a very successful event. That sort of brought us together, a cohort of folks that we say, let's keep working. Out of that came this database that I've tried to work on. I sort of slack around it, but it's a database of geospatial scientists and geospatial data users in African countries and the diaspora. The idea is for us to connect with each other in using this Earth observation data. There are two things. A lot of us who come from Africa to the diaspora, to UK, to US, to Australia, these days China. When it comes to dissertation, graduate studies project, we're looking for something to do back in Africa. It takes a lot of effort to actually figure out which of these are we going to use. But then if we have such a network, it will be easy for a graduate student who is looking for work on Africa to sort of pick up some information or learn what could be done. Sometimes you may have come from a country. I came from Ghana, and I wanted to do something on Accra because I'm a city boy. But quickly I learned, well, there's a need in the northern part of the country. I'll be honest, when I went back and I said I'm doing research in the north, people asked me, you lost your head? Why don't you work out here in the city? But these are some of the things that we need to learn. So this database that we're hoping will actually end up as an app is sort of to help people to connect with each other. And hopefully that's going to make a good case. I have to also indicate that I had an opportunity to go for a second Carnegie Fellowship. And let me mention and give a little shout out to the Carnegie Africa Diaspora Fellowship here. The goal there had been to recycle the knowledge. So for some of us here that would like to go back home and do something, sometimes we don't have all the funds. Our colleagues need some help from us. They don't have the money to bring us. The Carnegie Fellowship sort of gives that opportunity. We are paid travel, we are giving stipend, and actually accommodation is also taken care of. These days, if you need, equipment to do your work, it's also provided. And what it does is it allows us to go back to different African countries. In my case, I went to Ghana, I went to Uganda, and collaborate with your people. Again, not because you have all the information, but at least what we learn out here, if we are humble enough to work with our colleagues, not to tell them we know it all, but at least integrate what we've learned with what they have done there, because most of them actually came out here to study and went back home. So this is one of the things that is good with this Carnegie African Diaspora program that we, all these speakers, are part of. On my second visit to Kampala, I was in Ghana first, but I want to mention something about what happened to me in Uganda. We were looking at doing a community flood mapping in BRC, Kalare. It's a little outside Kampala, right? It's an informal settlement. And life over there is not the easiest. It's not in the best part of town. It's almost flooded. The socioeconomic condition of the people are different. So even university students at Makerere University, the flagship university in Uganda, and some people tell me you're not supposed to say that, at least that's what I know.
It is.
When we were going out there to have this community mapping, we had to engage with the local leadership. And then quickly they told us, well, you have to come in with the Red Cross. Once you have the jacket, it makes it easy. So we went in there, the leaders were also there to work with us. And once we had the jackets, people were actually coming and asking, you have tablets for me? You have medication for me? We said, we're doing this. They realized quickly, once we have the Red Cross jacket, we're doing something good for them. And I learned, it doesn't matter how many gadgets you've got. If you don't understand how to work in the system, it will be difficult to connect with these people. And I'm going to what someone said, the people who are the lower ends of society, if we don't lift them up, then for those of us who live in different parts of Africa, I grew up in Accra, I grew up in a city, so I can always identify. We don't really understand the pain the majority of the community in our countries go through. So when we come here and we learn all these things, we have all these tools when we go back home, it pays to understand and work with our colleagues, work with the local system, and realize that our technology won't work unless we make it work within the system. I try to tell myself, but I'm going to be brief here. Esther mentioned something that about building and the technology that have been used for a long time. And I remember when I was in the university back home, we went to Larabanga. They had a mosque, was built in 1100 AD. It's standing. However, the buildings around it all crumbled. And I keep wondering, why is it that these people who built a mosque 1100 AD, which is standing, are living in shambles? Couldn't they use the technology to build a mosque to improve their building? So these are some of the things where we can take the technology, we can take the information, but when we take it home, making it fit the culture, making it fit the system, making it fit what have made Africans resilient now, I think that's what makes things work. And this is where I come from as somebody working in the technology area, the geospatial technology area, into making things work so that Agenda 2063, God willing, would work for Africa. Some of us may be here, hopefully, but we'll be very old. And I will end my presentation here. Thank you. All right, so we have about 30 minutes more to go with this session, is it? Now this is out, okay, I see questions coming in. If you have a question, if you type your question in the chat area, I'll try and pick it up. And maybe some of my colleagues can also try and look at it as we pick it up. I see a question that, okay, there's a question for Samuel. Samuel, you ready? There's a question for you. What will Neo-Libra Pan-Africanism look like in practice?
Okay, actually, the term neoliberal Pan-Africanism, I cannot remember the title of the book, but I have it in my office. But it's a book that I read where somebody wrote, I believe it was his doctoral dissertation, and the focus was on Ghana. about how when Jerry Rawlings was around, he was trying to attract all these African Americans from all over the world or whatever, so that in the name of Pan-Africanism or whatever. But when you read very carefully, according to the African American scholar, what was all in it was, if you have money to invest, if there's something you're going to bring which will increase the growth of the Ghanaian economy or something like that, then come. But otherwise, no, we are not really welcoming you. So a neoliberal Pan-Africanism is almost, it's a kind of critique of the assumption that, the traditional assumption that people make about Pan-Africanism. Because genuine Pan-Africanism, if you go back to the era of people like Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, is something totally different from the from the neoliberal version, where everything is about money. You are only relevant if you have something on the table that is financial or something like that. Otherwise, you are not really taken really very, very seriously. So my point is, if we really want to have a genuine Pan-Africanism, we have to be very careful, because in a neoliberal economy, people who do not have money, they do not have human capital, they do not produce anything of value and things like that, are probably going to be marginalized. Even here in the United States, they are marginalized. They are considered to be surplus people, according to economic geographers, surplus, because literally the economy will function totally ignoring them. And I think we can have good Pan-Africanism that tries to minimize, as some of you said, as some of us said in the presentation. I think Florence mentioned the fact that we have to add a human face, which is a struggle, but it is something very important. Thank you.
So I have a question. It's long, so I'm going to ask Samuel Moses. Is it Interpan? Samuel Moses. Okay, yeah. Good. Can you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, sorry for writing a super long question. No, so I'm writing my thesis now, my PhD thesis on electronic repurposing and repairing in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And what I've encountered during my fieldwork, you know, anthropologists, we do 1 year fieldwork, is quite astonishing on how creativity, ingenuity, and innovation among what we call informal workers. And in Tanzania, they have a very good name for them, the heroes of wealth, wajasiriamali. So I've started thinking with this concept when we always advocate for education and jobs and employment. Can we think with this informal economy, what we call informal economy? Because we see, suppose in this year, 2/3 of the people in this planet will be working in informal sector. And we see the rise of unemployment also in the West due to technological advancement, artificial intelligence. We know that soon even surgeons, they're gonna lose their jobs. So informal or out of formal employment is gonna be the order of the planet. And I think Africa is already forward, is already champion. We see this in COVID-19, while all the West is suffering, Africa has already is showing how it's able to take care of itself somehow. So can we think with this informal sector, and are there any prospects, or what are the hindrances we can say? I'm just asking for the whole panel, if we can try.
I want to go first on that one, if you can allow me just a few things. Thank you so much for rethinking, because when I was talking about let's think about how to be innovative, creative, I'm sure it's all on our minds. There is a movement right now about workforce development. And that workforce development, actually, I have to say lots of money has been put into that from USAID. And I do know in this country, there is also that within the university system of Georgia here, a movement towards workforce development. That is developing, creating skill sets that are not so formal, but informal or in between. And I like that. It's a good thing to do, because some of you, if you have read Professor through his work where he talks about the clash of cultures or the coexistence of modernity and tradition. He also talks about a way of how you can survive in between. So this is the time, yes, to think about how our people actually can come up with innovations that can help them survive instead of relying heavily on these standard westernized, if I may call it, capitalist economies, which are extremely aggressive and demanding lots of skill sets that some of them cannot even afford because they're living deeply into poverty. So having said that, I think we go back. I remember as we were growing up, we had what you call vocational schools. You had schools where kids could go after senior 4 and high school, some of them learn how to do carpentry, pottery, tailoring, and so on and so forth. After some time, all those things disappeared. Now, in terms of tailoring, for Uganda, for example, what happened is we had a huge industry of tailoring industry because we grew lots of cotton. But guess what has happened? I think Uganda was outcompeted. These Asians coming up with rayon, synthetic type of material, they killed the industry softly. So as we talk about small scale businesses, informal business or markets, let's think also creatively in how they can be sustainable, because we are operating in the context of very aggressive capitalist economies. But it is doable, and that is, I think, a leap forward for us Africans, other than just thinking we can clamor to go straight to the white collar jobs. Good point. Let's continue thinking.
All right, Professor Okome.
I think that I'm a bit frustrated because the world we live in now is neoliberal, okay? And when I talked about decent jobs, I'm not talking about just jobs in the formal economy. But if people are in the informal sector, are they supposed to be able to ever retire, or should they work until they die? Should they have access to health care? Should they have the capacity through the jobs that they're doing to have social safety nets that people who work in the formal economy take for granted? So there's no, in my thinking, there's no, I'm not discounting the effect of people's creativity, but there's a difference between survival and thriving, okay? So why should our people be just at the level of surviving? This workforce development thing that we're talking about is a product of neoliberalism here too. It's a product of the informalization of labor and taking away rights that working people had that gave them the capacity to meet their needs. So, you know, I think we need to kind of understand the world economy and how it's working. Are we saying that it's okay for our people to just be scratching a living and, you know, hanging on for dear life in order to just be able to put food on the table? Or is it possible to do some kind of forward thinking where there are social safety nets created? And by the way, even in the neoliberal setup, in the last few years, people have started talking about increasing the social safety nets. And they're talking about giving people, what is it called? I can't remember the technical name for it, you know, because it's been seen that this way of, you know, abandoning people and saying that nobody is responsible, they should just go and be entrepreneurs, it's not working. Okay, so yes, our people are creative. And actually, in terms of technology, I am very excited because a lot of young people in all our metropolises are having all these tech hubs where they're doing really fantastic things, you know. But should they not have some kind of support to give infrastructure, you know, that enables them to do these things at a higher level? should they not be able to build their capacity to develop, scale up? So I don't, this thing about survival, yes, people should survive, but I want more than survival. And I think that what we need to be thinking about is redistribution. Because a few of us Africans have cornered everything, and then we're saying that the majority should just go and survive and be creative. That's not right. So if you're talking about economic and social justice, here they talk about 1% and 99%. In Africa, it's like 0.1% and everybody else. And we need to change that. So that's what I'm saying, that we need decent jobs, jobs that give people the capacity to live their lives in dignity. They can still be creative. They can still, do all kinds of innovative things, but they should not be left to their own devices while there are political elites taking all the money,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll jump in next because I used the word entrepreneurship and my brother-in-law asked the question. So, yeah, I think my sector exemplifies how the hands-on skills can be used to empower people. There is a hierarchy of how much people make depending on their skills, right? If I'm a skilled mason, I do not survive. I make a decent living. If I am to Mkono, no skills, I have not had any training, I've not done apprenticeship, then my wage rate is low. So the issue of skills is something that definitely should come in. And where fourth industrial revolution can help, for example, there are very many things which can be learned digitally, not everything. The apprenticeship, for example, can be done in person. But for you to get certification, you need to take exams, having virtual modeling, simulation. Those are things which can be made accessible to get people a foot in the door so that when I go to the construction site with my hammer, at least I've seen something. And I'm not starting from completely scratch. The person who's there working as a skilled mason can be can be mentoring me and advising me on the things which require hands-on training. So I just wanted to point that out. I'll also say language is very important. In my field, again, if you say informal, there is no money. The money is in the formal sector. So we want the artisans, the creative, hardworking entrepreneurs. We want them to get certification so that they can get jobs in the formal sector. They will work for themselves if they want to. They don't have to work for anybody else. But we want to get them inside the formal sector where the big projects are being done, where money is being, where the money that they're being given in terms of compensation is at a decent level. Another thing I wanted to say again, linking back to the fourth industrial revolution in my sector, one of the biggest issues is injury rates. Yeah, and we're talking about things like musculoskeletal disorders, falling, being struck by something. Technology can help lower the rate at which people are getting hurt. This is good at the micro level in terms of the number of days people are absent from work, compensation cost, hospitalization rates, etc., people having to retire prematurely because their backs are damaged because they've had something, right? And at the macro level, it's also bleeding the economy. The social nets that you're talking about, we can use technology to make our construction sites more safe and less hazardous. We can get very high tech and say, again, I'll use my sector as an example. There are opportunities for women to participate, but the materials involved sometimes are heavy. If we use the emerging technologies, we make more of those jobs accessible to wanawake, to women. We empower women by using the technology that already exists. Final example, 3D printing. So these are things which are being done by people in biomedical engineering. You've seen how masks, face shield, there are very many things which are not that complicated that can be produced locally, and we can empower people in a way that leaves them not at the survival rate, but at the survival level, but a level where they're actually competitive. There's a person who came to my house to fix an appliance. He was in and out in 15 minutes. I paid him $400. Yeah, just think of that. If we had Africans who know how to handle some of these advanced things in the homes, the hourly rate that they're going to be making is not going to be anything that we can look down upon. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. We have about 8 minutes to go. So I'm still going to open the floor and see if anybody has a question. Whilst we're waiting for questions, let me throw a challenge to all our panelists here. We've all been to African countries. We've been to our own country. Sometimes we went outside our own country. One of the key issues that people have raised, the interaction between the diaspora. When you come in here and you work here, you pick up some of the cultures, and you go back home, having that interaction be seamless within the context of capacity building. I don't know if anybody wants to share a perspective or maybe an experience or something on this whole idea of capacity building in a harmonious way between Africans from the diaspora and African scholars or African experts in Africa. I'm not talking about somebody on the street, but our folks that are seated in the government offices, the chief of operations in the ministry or in the research university. Anybody wants to take on this?
What is your question? Are you asking whether we still have collaborations with people in Africa based on our experience through fellowship?
And I'm asking if anybody can comment on, I don't want to use the term tension, but when we go back home, right? For me, going from Ghana, a lot of times people you grew up with, you'll be talking, and maybe if I talk remote sensing, they'll listen. The moment I start talking about how to use it to apply to, you don't know what is going on here. And it can be frustrating. You try to find a way to have a conversation, right? And if we're going to have an impact, I think that is one key thing to bridge that gap, that understanding between us and our colleagues at home.
Okay. All right. May I finish just 2 minutes or 1 minute? I would say that, yes, the struggle continues because the fact is that our lives are bifurcated. One foot is here, another foot is over there. And because one foot is here, we take on the culture experiences and perceptions from here. When we go home, there is no question whether you say, I try to be like them, it's not true, you are lying. Because there are certain things that give you a cultural shock. At least for me, I have experienced that. So one thing I've learned to cope with that is I still maintain collaboration with my former students at Makerere. Even at Sokoine University of Agriculture, we collaborate. I have supervised their dissertations, and in the process, in a way, I'm getting enculturated. And also working on projects. And this is one thing I want to encourage my colleagues in that I believe so strongly in education. And so what I've done is to, at least what I would call, adopt a school, a primary school. What does that mean? I am on the board, I work with them, I'm providing them with some knowledge that really they need. And to collaboratively, we are working together to support those kids in a school. And that way, I'm able to learn new ways of how they do things. But I do get frustrated too, because you come up with an idea and you know how it operates, how they can work very well. They tell you, no, this is supposed to be like this. It shouldn't be that way. So there is that kind of clash of culture. Again, I go back to Professor Ali Mazrui. It is there, but we have to learn to navigate through language, through our actions, but maintain the relationship, because after all, that is a place we shall never forget. It will always be home, even if we are here.
Thank you. I see Professor Okome's hand was up, so.
Yes, it was up. You know, I don't know why, okay. There is actually a lot of tension. And I think it's because people from the diaspora are often very arrogant. Because people think that because they've traveled and they've studied, that they have brought the proverbial golden fleece and everybody should be hanging on their every word and doing everything that they're saying, you know, without question. So we don't want people to, we don't want to have conversations. We want to tell people what to do. And people sense this, and they're very dismissive of our efforts. So I think a bit of humility goes a long way. I actually don't have any problem. I guess because all my sisters are in Nigeria, and I go several times a year sometimes. You know, there's also, even if you are not arrogant, people are going to put you through some stress because they expect that arrogance to come at some point. I think it's a question of, number one, humility. Number two, it's a relationship that you're going to develop, you know. So your first time of presenting an idea to people, there may be resistance. Then are you also listening? You know, do you think you can learn from people? I think sometimes they don't think that we can learn anything from people, you know. So a give and take in terms of communication, a bit of humility, and then, you know, persistence. When people resist and reject and even abuse you, but they see that you keep coming back and that you have the right attitude, then they're going to be willing to work with you. And, you know, so I think a little bit of respect and some understanding also, because a lot of us left when things were very hard. Structural adjustment drove us out. People who suffered, they feel that they felt the pain. Now you are coming and you want to come up on the top and be telling them what to do, and you haven't earned the right to do that. So I think it's normal, and, you know, a bit of humility on our side, a bit of persistence, and a willingness to listen and to know that we can also learn from our colleagues, that they have local knowledge and institutional knowledge that we lack. And we better just accept that and be willing to work with them as equals, instead of, I brought knowledge, I brought money, and you're going to have to listen to me.
Thank you very much. It's 5:44. We have a minute. Let me, is there any comments from the floor before we wrap up?
We're so wise, we've said it all.
Okay. All right, so we're pretty much there, and I want to share this as we wrap up. I want to share with you, just as a reminder, that this is a panel of African Diaspora Fellowship Program. All the panelists have been alumni of the program. We've all been to Africa to do some work. The program is open to everybody else, but this discussion, I hope, will continue beyond ASA. And the good thing is, there are people like me in the technology area that would normally not be here. But good thing we are here talking and understanding how we can all go back and help in Africa. So thank you for participating. And once we have a few seconds, any comments are welcome.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody, and thank you very much for participating.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
The sister should be cutting us off in a bit. It looks like he gave us extra time. Abdul, how are we doing?
The system automatically cuts us off after.
I better get out before they
3 minutes.
push me out. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right.